My husband canceled our anniversary dinner, claiming he had to work late. I watched through the rain-streaked windshield as he walked into another woman's house with champagne and roses meant for me. He thought I would be waiting at home, crying into my wine. Instead, I followed him to her doorstep with signed divorce papers in hand and 7 years of lies exposed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The look on both their faces when they opened that door is something I'll never forget. The digital clock on my dashboard read 7:42 p.m., exactly 42 minutes after our anniversary dinner reservation that Thomas had canceled. 3 hours after, he texted that an emergency client meeting would keep him at the office until midnight. 12 minutes since I'd watched my husband of 7 years walk up to a stranger's house with roses and champagne that should have been mine. The weight of the manila envelope in my hands felt heavier than the 7 years we'd spent building a life together. Inside were the divorce papers I'd had drawn up 2 weeks ago, when I first discovered the truth. I hadn't planned on delivering them tonight. But then again, Thomas hadn't planned on me following him either. They say defining moments in life come when you least expect them. Mine came on our 7th anniversary, standing in the rain, watching the carefully constructed facade of my marriage crumble before my eyes. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind for 14 days, practiced what I would say when I finally confronted Thomas about his affair, imagined the shock, the denial, the inevitable confession. But standing there, rain soaking through my carefully chosen anniversary dress, I realized no amount of preparation could steady my racing heart. I had spent 3 hours getting ready for a dinner that would never happen. Chosen a dress that Thomas had once said brought out the blue in my eyes. Applied makeup with the precision of someone who still believed in perfect evenings and honest promises. Now, I stood outside another woman's home, witnessing the death of those beliefs in real time. I've always wondered what true shock looks like on a person's face. That split second when the mind can't process what the eyes are seeing. When I pressed that doorbell, I found out I never thought I'd be this woman. The one following her husband, gathering evidence, consulting lawyers. The one standing in the rain about to shatter the comfortable lies we'd both been living. This wasn't the life I had planned. At 34, I had checked all the boxes life had offered. Prestigious architecture firm partner by 30, dream home in the suburbs by 32, marriage to my college sweetheart that all our friends envied. I designed beautiful spaces for other people's lives while methodically constructing my own. Our home was a showcase, the kind that makes it into architectural digests. High ceilings, open concept, carefully curated art. Thomas called it my masterpiece. What visitors couldn't see were the invisible walls we'd built between us, room by room, year by year. As I stood at her door, I thought about all the stories we tell ourselves to avoid facing painful truths. How Thomas was just working hard for our future. How his distance was stress, not disinterest. How the late nights and weekend emergencies were dedication to his career, not to someone else. For months, I had been the woman waiting at home. The one making excuses to friends about his absences. The one lying awake at 2 a.m., wondering where he really was. Tonight, I was done waiting. I straightened my posture, pushed back my shoulders, and pressed the doorbell. I listened to its cheerful chime echo through the house. Inside, I could hear movement, laughter, the clinking of glasses. The sounds of an anniversary celebration that wasn't mine. The door swung open, and there was Thomas, still in his work suit, but with the tie loosened, top button undone. The way he used to look coming home to me. His eyes went from warm anticipation to cold fear in the span of a heartbeat. "Elena, how did you—" I remained composed, extending the envelope toward him. "Happy anniversary, Thomas." A woman appeared behind Thomas, confusion on her face. She was beautiful, younger, the kind of woman who probably didn't have to schedule intimacy on a shared Google Calendar. She looked at me with confusion, then at Thomas with growing understanding. "Thomas? Who is this?" she asked. "I'm his wife. Or at least, I am for now," I replied, holding out the envelope, my hand steady despite everything. "I thought I'd save. You a trip to the lawyer's office. Everything's there. Signed, notarized, ready for your signature." Thomas stared at the envelope but didn't take it. "Elena, please. This isn't—" "I can explain." "There's nothing to explain. Not anymore, I said with calm dignity. I placed the envelope in his hands, then turned to the woman. "He likes his steak medium rare and he's allergic to shellfish. He'll tell you he's fine sleeping on either side of the bed, but he always gravitates to the left. And he apparently makes the same promises to multiple women, so I'd consider that carefully." I turned back to Thomas, who stood speechless. 7 years, Thomas. 7 years of building a life while you were building lies. I deserve better. We both know that. Rain continued to fall as I turned to leave, holding my posture straight, dignified even in betrayal. As I walked back to my car, I felt the weight of those 7 years lifting with each step, the rain washing away the woman who made excuses, who waited up, who believed the lies. I didn't look back. Not at the house, not at Thomas, not at the life I was leaving behind. They say the truth will set you free. What they don't tell you is that freedom comes with its own kind of pain. And power. I had never felt more of both than I did in that moment, driving away from the man who had broken my heart and the woman who had unwittingly helped me find my strength. 7 years earlier, I stood beneath an archway of white roses, my hands trembling as I held Thomas's. The autumn sun filtered through the trees surrounding us, creating patterns of light and shadow across his face. His eyes, those deep brown eyes that had captivated me since our first meeting in advanced design studio at university, were filled with unshed tears. "I promise to be your partner, your confidant, your greatest supporter," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I will love you through success and failure, through joy and sorrow, through all the designs we create together. This I vow to you, today and always." I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? We had been the golden couple of our architecture program. Thomas with his innovative structural designs, and me with my eye for livable spaces that told stories. Our professors had joked that between us we could revolutionize residential architecture. We had dreams of starting our own firm someday, of building homes that changed how people lived. Our courtship had been a blueprint as carefully drawn as any of our designs. Coffee dates between classes turned into late nights in the studio, working side by side, his shoulder brushing mine as we leaned over drafting tables. Our first kiss happened surrounded by foam core models and blueprint paper, when he stayed, up all night helping me finish my final project after my computer crashed. By graduation, our classmates treated us as a single entity, Thomas and Elena. "You two just make sense together," my best friend Mia told me at our engagement party. "Like you were designed as complementary pieces of the same structure." That's how it felt, like we fit together perfectly, our strengths and weaknesses balanced. Thomas was bold where I was cautious. I was detail-oriented where he sometimes missed the finer points. We completed each other in ways that seemed predestined. Our first apartment was tiny. A 1-bedroom walk-up with windows that stuck in the summer and radiators that clanged all winter. But it was ours. We spent weekends scouring flea markets for furniture we could refinish, painting walls at midnight, arguing playfully about whether form or function should take precedence in our limited space. The bathroom door never quite closed right, and the kitchen barely fit both of us at once, but we loved it. We made plans there, sprawled on our secondhand couch, legs intertwined, sketching our future on paper napkins. Someday, Thomas would say, tracing imaginary floor plans in the air above us, "We'll build our dream house, with a studio for each of us overlooking the garden." I'd add to his vision, and a kitchen big enough for us to cook together without bumping elbows. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And bookshelves that go all the way to the ceiling, he'd continue, and window seats in every room, I'd finish. We built that dream house in our minds 100 different ways before we ever broke ground on the real thing. The early years of our marriage were golden. We worked for different firms but collaborated on contests and side projects. Thomas's star rose quickly. His innovative commercial designs caught the attention of senior partners. I specialized in high-end residential work, bringing warmth and personality to spaces that might otherwise have felt sterile. We pushed each other, challenged each other, celebrated each other's victories as our own. Our first anniversary, Thomas surprised me with a trip to Barcelona to see Gaudí's architecture. We wandered through Park Güell hand in hand, marveling at the organic forms and vibrant mosaics. At Casa Batlló, Thomas pulled me close in the central atrium. "This is what I want our work to do," he whispered. "I want people to feel something when they stand in the spaces we create." "Together?" I answered, leaning into him. "The spaces we create together." He kissed me right there, beneath Gaudí's rippling ceiling, and I felt like we were standing at the center of possibility. For our second anniversary, I surprised him with news that I'd been approached to become a junior partner at my firm, the youngest in their history. We celebrated with champagne on our apartment's tiny balcony, making plans for the future with the twinkling city lights spread out below us. "We're going to make it, Lena," he said, using the nickname only he ever used. "Everything we've talked about, it's all happening." By our third anniversary, Thomas had also made partner at his firm. We bought land outside the city and began designing our dream house in earnest. Nights and weekends were spent hunched over plans, debating the merits of open concept versus defined spaces, arguing playfully about whether the primary suite should face east for morning light or west for sunsets. "Both?" Thomas finally declared one night. "Corner suite, windows on two sides." "Extravagant," I teased. "Only the best for us," he replied, kissing the top of my head. "We've earned this," and we had. We both worked 60-hour weeks, took on side projects, saved aggressively. We had a plan: build our dream home, establish ourselves as industry leaders, then start our own boutique firm by the time we turned 40. Children were a question mark, something we said we'd discuss once the house was built and our careers were more established. Our fourth anniversary was spent on the land that would become our home, having a picnic on the freshly poured foundation. Thomas brought champagne and strawberries, and we toasted to our future as the sun set over what would become our west-facing windows. "To building a life together," he said, his glass clinking against mine. "Brick by brick, day by day." "To us," I replied, believing with my whole heart that us was unshakable. By our fifth anniversary, the house was complete. A modernist dream of glass, steel, and warm wood nestled among mature trees on 3 acres of land. The house was featured in Architectural Digest, described as a perfect marriage of form and function, just like its creator inhabitants. We hosted a housewarming party that doubled as an anniversary celebration, surrounded by friends and colleagues, who marveled at what we had accomplished. "You two are living the dream," they said. "You make it look so easy." And in many ways it was easy. We were partners in everything. We finished each other's sentences, anticipated each other's needs, moved through our spaces and our lives in perfect choreography. When Thomas was offered a position leading a new sustainable design initiative at his firm, I rearranged my schedule to help him prepare his presentation. When I struggled with a difficult client, he stayed up late brainstorming solutions with me. We were Thomas and Alina, a perfect unit, a success story. At least, that's what I thought. Our dream house became our sanctuary, a place where we could both work and live, designed precisely for our needs. The kitchen was a showpiece, custom walnut cabinets, a massive island where we could both prep meals without crowding each other, a window over the sink that framed the garden like a painting. We called it the heart of our home, and that's where we spent most of our time together. Sunday mornings became sacred. Thomas would make coffee. He was particular about it, grinding the beans fresh, measuring the water temperature, while I prepared Belgian waffles with seasonal fruit. We'd sit at the breakfast nook, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, planning our week or simply enjoying the silence together. "This is perfection," Thomas said one such morning, gesturing around us with his coffee mug. "Sometimes, I can't believe we actually pulled it off." I knew what he meant. We had manifested our shared vision, built a life that reflected our values and aesthetics. It felt like proof that we could accomplish anything together. Our home was more than just a beautiful space. It was functional, tailored to our habits and preferences. Thomas had his own studio on the east side of the house, where morning light would energize him for his best creative work. Mine was on the west, because I preferred working into the evening hours. The primary suite had a sitting area where we would sometimes end the day, Thomas reading architectural journals while I sketched preliminary designs for upcoming projects. "We should write a book," Thomas suggested one evening, "about designing a home that truly works for the people who live in it, not just aesthetically, but emotionally, functionally." "We could," I agreed, looking up from my sketchpad. "There's so much focus on how homes look for magazines, and not enough on how they feel to live in." He smiled at me over his reading glasses, and I felt that familiar flush of connection, the certainty that I had found someone who truly understood me, who valued what I valued. Our private rituals defined our marriage as much as our public achievements. The way Thomas would bring me tea when I was working late on a difficult project, the notes I would leave in his briefcase before important presentations, the shorthand we'd developed over years, a raised eyebrow across a crowded room that meant, "Ready to go?" or a hand on a shoulder that said, "I'm proud of you." Physical intimacy ebbed and flowed as it does in any long-term relationship, but there was a tenderness between us that felt constant. Thomas knew exactly how to massage away the tension I carried in my shoulders after hours at the drafting table. I knew the precise spot at the base of his neck that would make him melt under my fingers after a stressful day. "No one knows me like you do," he would murmur as I worked out the knots in his shoulders. Even our disagreements had a pattern, a rhythm we had perfected. Thomas would get intense, his voice rising with passion about whatever we were discussing. I would grow quieter, more measured. We'd reach an impasse, step away to cool off, then come back together with compromises already forming. We rarely went to bed angry. It was one of our unspoken rules. "You're stubborn," he would say with a half smile. "I'm precise," I would counter. "There's a difference." "It's a good thing I love your precision," he'd reply, pulling me close. Career successes mounted for both of us. Thomas led a team that won an international competition for an eco-friendly corporate campus. I was named one of 40 under 40 in the design world. Our holiday cards became a creative challenge each year, usually featuring our house photographed in different seasons with updates about our projects. Friends often commented on how in sync we seemed. At dinner parties, we would finish each other's thoughts or simultaneously reach for the same object. Mia once joked that we had developed a hive mind. "You're like one person in two bodies," she said. It's equal parts adorable and annoying to the rest of us mere mortals. We laughed, but I secretly loved that others could see the connection we felt. There was pride in being half of such a seemingly perfect union. Through it all, our home remained our greatest collaboration. We continued to refine it, update it, adapt it to our evolving needs. When Thomas started cycling, we converted part of the garage into a workout area. When I began taking on more historical renovation projects, we built additional bookshelves for my growing collection of architectural history texts. Our 6th anniversary was spent in Japan, touring traditional homes and gardens. We walked hand in hand through temple grounds, taking inspiration from the perfect balance of indoor and outdoor space, the attention to detail, the celebration of natural materials. We should incorporate more of this mindfulness into our next projects, Thomas said as we sat beside a koi pond, watching the fish swim lazy circles. The idea that every element serves both a practical and spiritual purpose, I agreed. Nothing extraneous, nothing wasted. Exactly, he smiled, squeezing my hand. You always understand what I'm trying to say, even when I can't quite articulate it. That night, in our ryokan with sliding paper doors and tatami mats, we made love with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. Afterward, lying in his arms, I felt a completeness that seemed unassailable. 7 years next year, he whispered against my hair. Isn't that supposed to be when people get itchy? The 7-year itch is a myth, I replied, tracing patterns on his chest. We're stronger than ever. He kissed the top of my head. You're right. We're the exception to every rule. I believed that. I believed in us, in the foundation we had, built in the walls we had raised together, in the roof that sheltered our dreams. Our marriage wasn't just a relationship. It was architecture of the most personal kind, designed with intention, built to last. How could I have known that even as we lay there, the structure was already beginning to crack? The morning after the Yao Gala, I made a decision. I wouldn't become the suspicious, insecure wife. I wouldn't let Vanessa Monroe have that power over me. Not again. Not after all these years. I was a successful architect, a confident woman who had built a beautiful life. I refused to let old insecurities cloud my judgment. But the universe had other plans. A week later, I was having lunch with Mia at a new bistro downtown when I saw them. Thomas and Vanessa, sitting at a corner table by the window, heads bent close, together over what looked like blueprints. His hand rested casually on the back of her chair. She laughed at something he said, tossing her perfect hair over her shoulder. Elena, you okay? Mia's voice seemed to come from far away. You look like you've seen a ghost. In a way I had, the ghost of my teenage self, insecure and betrayed. That's Thomas, I said quietly, nodding toward their table. With Vanessa. Monroe? Mia followed my gaze, her eyes widening. Wait, the Vanessa Monroe? The one who… Yes, I cut her off. Apparently she's working with his firm on a project. And he didn't tell you it was her? Mia's voice had an edge to it. He mentioned working with the founder of a wellness company. He didn't specify. Mia's eyes narrowed. That seems like a pretty significant detail to omit. Before I could respond, Thomas looked up and saw me. Something flashed across his face, surprise, guilt, I couldn't tell which, before he raised his hand in greeting. I forced a smile and waved back. Vanessa turned, her expression changing from confusion to recognition. She gave me a bright, artificial smile that didn't reach her eyes. Should we go say hello? Mia asked, already half rising. No, I said quickly. They're working. We shouldn't interrupt. The truth was, I couldn't bear the thought of making small talk with Vanessa, of pretending we were just old classmates with no history. I couldn't stomach watching Thomas perform the role of doting husband while sitting beside the woman who had once done her best to destroy my self-worth. We finished our lunch quickly, and I insisted on paying so we could leave sooner. As we walked out, I felt their eyes on my back but didn't turn around. You know it's probably nothing, Mia said as we stood on the sidewalk outside. Thomas loves you. Everyone can see that. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But that night, Thomas came home later than usual. When I asked about his day, he mentioned meetings, client calls, progress on the Sustainable Campus project. He didn't mention lunch with Vanessa. I saw you today, I said finally as we were getting ready for bed. At Bordeaux Bistro. Thomas paused, toothbrush halfway to his mouth. Oh, right. Working lunch with the wellness consultant. Vanessa, I said, watching his reflection in the bathroom mirror. He met my eyes in the glass. Yes, Vanessa. I thought, you knew that's who I was working with. You never mentioned her name after the gala. He shrugged, the gesture too casual. Didn't think it was important. You said you weren't friends. We weren't, I agreed. Quite the opposite, actually. Thomas turned to face me directly, his expression concerned. What do you mean? So I told him about the rumors Vanessa had spread, the pranks that destroyed my work, the boyfriend she'd turned against me, the campaign of subtle humiliation that had made me dread going to school each day. Jesus, Elena, why didn't you tell me this before? Thomas looked genuinely shocked. I didn't think it mattered. It was a long time ago, and I never expected to see her again, let alone have my husband working closely with her. Thomas came to me then, wrapped, his arms around me. I had no idea. I'm sorry you went through that. But people change, you know? She seems different now. Different. The word hung between us. What did he mean by different? Better? More mature? More worthy of his time and attention? If it makes you uncomfortable, I can see if someone else can be our liaison with her company, he offered. I pulled back, studying his face. This was my Thomas, considerate, concerned for my feelings. No, it's fine. Like you said, it was a long time ago. He smiled, relief evident in his eyes. Okay, but if it becomes an issue, just say the word. I nodded, ignoring the voice in my head asking why he seemed so relieved. The weeks that followed brought more subtle changes. Thomas's phone would light up with texts that made him smile when he thought I wasn't looking. He started going to the gym more frequently, a new routine, he explained, recommended by the wellness consultant for stress management. He bought new clothes, more stylish than his usual conservative attire. Started using a different cologne. Do you like it? He asked one morning, after applying the unfamiliar scent. It's supposed to have stress-relieving properties. Part of the whole wellness initiative. I hated it. It didn't smell like my Thomas. But I smiled and said it was nice, because what else could I say? It smells like another woman's preference? It smells like you're becoming someone I don't recognize? Our conversations grew more superficial. We discussed schedules, household matters, professional obligations. But the deeper sharing that had always characterized our relationship began to fade. When I tried to talk about my concerns for a historic renovation project I was leading, Thomas listened with half his attention, his eyes frequently drifting to his phone. Sorry, he'd say when I called him on it. Just a lot on my mind. With this project. Always this project. With Vanessa. One Sunday morning, Thomas announced he needed to go into the office for a few hours. On Sunday? I asked, surprise evident in my voice. Our Sunday mornings were sacred, had been since we moved into our dream home. Just for a bit. We have a big presentation tomorrow and I need to finalize some details. He kissed me goodbye, promised to be back for lunch. I watched from the kitchen window as he backed his car out of the driveway, noticed how he had dressed, more carefully than usual for a casual Sunday work session. When he was gone, I did something I'd never done before. I went into his home office, not to snoop, at least that's what I told myself, but to collect the coffee mug he'd left there the night before. His desk was meticulously organized as always. Blueprints rolled neatly in their tubes, reference books lined up by height, a framed photo of us on our wedding day, and a small gift bag pushed slightly behind the monitor. I shouldn't have looked. I knew I shouldn't, but my hand moved of its own accord, drawing the bag forward. Inside was a small jewelry box, and within it, a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a miniature dumbbell. A private joke for the wellness consultant, perhaps? The gift receipt was still in the bag. Dated 3 days ago. Our anniversary was still 2 weeks away, and we had never given each other fitness-themed jewelry. This wasn't for me. I carefully replaced everything exactly as I had found it, my hands trembling. Then I took his coffee mug to the kitchen, washed it methodically, and placed it back in the cabinet where it belonged. When Thomas returned that afternoon, I was sketching in my studio, focusing intently on a detail that didn't matter for a project that could have waited. He popped his head in, asked if I wanted to take a walk. I declined, claiming a deadline. "You work too hard," he said, his voice warm with concern. I looked up at him, this man I had loved for a decade, this man who had stood before friends and family and promised to be faithful, and wondered who he had become. Or perhaps, who he had always been beneath the surface. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his even breathing, and made a decision. I needed to know the truth, whatever it might be. I needed evidence, not suspicion. Certainty, not doubt. The next morning, I called a private investigator. The private investigator's office was nothing like the film noir cliches I'd imagined. No Venetian blinds casting striped shadows across cluttered desks, no ceiling fans spinning lazily overhead. Instead, Diane Rivera operated out of a sleek downtown office suite that could have belonged to an accountant or a therapist. "Most of my clients are women like you," she said after I'd explained my situation. "Successful, intelligent, accomplished in their fields. Women who never thought they'd be sitting across from someone like me." Her matter-of-factness was oddly comforting. She didn't offer sympathy or judgment, just pragmatic expertise. "I need to know for certain," I told her. "Not just suspicions or coincidences. I need proof." "That's what everyone says," Diane replied, tapping her pen against her notepad. "But let me ask you something, Elena. What will you do with this proof once you have it?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on confirming my suspicions that I hadn't fully considered what would come next. "I don't know," I admitted. "I suppose that depends on what you find." Diane nodded, seeming satisfied with my honesty. "That's a good answer. Better than people who come in here with elaborate revenge fantasies." She leaned forward. "Here's what I suggest. A 2-week surveillance. We'll track Thomas's movements, document any meetings with this Vanessa person, gather whatever evidence exists. Then you can decide your next steps with complete information." I wrote her a check, provided Thomas's schedule and Vanessa's details, and walked out feeling both relieved and horrified. Relieved that someone else would now carry the burden of my suspicions. Horrified that I had become a woman who hired someone to spy on her husband. The next 2 weeks were an exercise in pretending. I pretended everything was normal when Thomas mentioned late meetings. I pretended to believe him when he said he was going to the gym. I pretended not to notice how he always seemed to find a reason to check his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. Meanwhile, Diane sent me brief, cryptic updates. Subject observed entering location A at 12:30. Left at 2:15. Subject and person of interest met at location B for approximately 45 minutes. Surveillance continuing. More details at our meeting. I stopped sleeping properly. Found myself standing in our beautiful kitchen, the one we had designed together with such care, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I looked at the custom walnut cabinets, the perfectly positioned island, the window framing the garden like a painting, and wondered if any of it had been real, if Thomas had meant any of his promises, or if I had built my life on a foundation of sand. 13 days after hiring Diane, as I was leaving a client meeting, downtown, my phone buzzed with a text. "Need to speak with you urgently. Can you come to the office?" My heart pounded as I drove to Diane's office. Had she found something definitive? Or was this all an elaborate misunderstanding I'd created out of insecurity and old high school trauma? Diane was waiting for me, a folder on her desk, her expression unreadable. "I wasn't planning to meet with you until tomorrow," she said, gesturing for me to sit. But something happened today that I thought you should know about immediately. She opened the folder and slid a series of photographs across the desk. Thomas entering a jewelry store. Thomas examining something at the counter. Thomas leaving, with a small bag. He bought a diamond tennis bracelet, Diane said quietly. Quite expensive, according to my source in the store. I stared at the photos, feeling oddly numb. Our anniversary is next week. Yes, Diane agreed. It could be for you, but there's more. She showed me the next set of photos. Thomas meeting Vanessa at a restaurant I didn't recognize. Thomas handing her a gift bag. Vanessa's delighted expression as she opened it. The bracelet, unmistakably the same one from the jewelry store, glittering on her wrist as she leaned across the table to kiss him. Not on the cheek. Not a friendly thank you. A kiss on the lips that lasted long enough for Diane to capture it from multiple angles. I'm sorry, Diane said, and I could tell she meant it. I sat there, staring at the evidence of my husband's betrayal, feeling strangely calm, almost relieved. The uncertainty had been worse than the truth, painful as it was. There's more, Diane continued, hesitating slightly. We've been monitoring their text communications. You can do that? I asked, surprised. With the right approach, yes. You didn't ask for that specifically, but I had a feeling. She slid printouts of text messages across the desk. I forced myself to read them. Most were innocuous on the surface. Discussions about meeting times, project details. But interspersed were messages that made my stomach clench. Can't stop thinking about yesterday. When can I see you again? This project was the best thing that ever happened to me. Found my way back to you after all these years. If only we had more time. Soon, I promise. And then the most recent exchange, from that morning. Thomas. Can't make our anniversary dinner next week. Need to come up with something convincing. Vanessa. Tell her you have to work late. She always believes that one. Then come to my place. I'll make it worth the lie. Thomas. Perfect. Can't wait. She'll never know. I set the papers down, my hands perfectly steady. Our anniversary is next Friday. He hasn't mentioned any dinner plans yet. He made reservations at Giovanni's, Diane said. Called 2 days ago. Table for 2 at 7 p.m. Giovanni's. Where he had proposed. Where we had celebrated every anniversary since our wedding. Where he was planning to stand me up so he could be with Vanessa. There's one more thing, Diane said, pulling out a final set of photos. They've been looking at apartments together. The images showed Thomas and Vanessa touring what appeared to be a luxury condo downtown. Holding hands as they walked through. Empty rooms. Standing on a balcony, his arm around her waist, looking out at a view of the city. When? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Yesterday afternoon, when he said he had a client meeting. I nodded, absorbing this final piece of the puzzle. Do you have copies of all of this for me? Of course. Diane handed me a USB drive and a sealed envelope. Everything's here. Photos, texts, detailed reports of their meetings, dates, times, locations. I took them, slipping them into my bag. Thank you. What will you do now? She asked. The same question from our first meeting. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange clarity. The path forward suddenly obvious. I'm going to see my lawyer, I said, and then I'm going to make some plans of my own. As I drove home, the evidence safely tucked in my bag, I thought about all the signs I'd ignored. The late nights, the changed passcode on his phone, the new clothes, the different cologne, the growing distance between us. I thought about Vanessa Monroe, who had tormented me in high school and was now sleeping with my husband, who had shared private jokes with him, been given expensive gifts, looked at apartments where they would presumably build a life together once I was out of the picture. I thought about Thomas, who had stood before our friends and family and promised to love me forever, who had helped design our dream home, board by board, room by room, who had looked me in the eye and lied, day after day, month after month. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had stopped shaking, stopped feeling anything at all, really. In its place was a cold, clear determination. Thomas wouldn't be coming home until late, I knew. Another work emergency that was actually a rendezvous with Vanessa. It gave me time to make some calls, set some things in motion. I had 2 weeks until our anniversary. 2 weeks to prepare for the moment when Thomas would tell me he had to work late, when he would expect me to believe him one more time, when he would go to Vanessa thinking I was safely at home, devastated, but compliant. 2 weeks to ensure that when that day came, I would be ready. The next morning, I watched Thomas prepare for work with new eyes. Every movement, every gesture now seemed like a performance. The way he kissed my cheek before leaving, perfunctory, distracted. The casual "love you" tossed over his shoulder as he grabbed his keys. The practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. Had it always been this way? Had I simply failed to notice the artifice, or had it developed gradually as his attention shifted to Vanessa? That evening, when he returned home, earlier than usual, I noted, I decided to test the waters. I was thinking, I said as we prepared, dinner together, chopping vegetables side by side in our perfect kitchen. Maybe we should do something special for our anniversary this year. Thomas's knife paused momentarily before resuming its rhythm. Like what? Maybe a weekend away? The Berkshire cabin we stayed in that winter could be nice. He didn't look up from the cutting board. I don't know if I can get away that weekend. The sustainable campus presentation is the following Monday. Lie, smooth and practiced. I almost admired the ease with which he delivered it. Oh? I kept my voice neutral. You didn't mention that, didn't I? Must have slipped my mind with everything going on. I set down my knife, turning to face him directly. A lot of things seem to be slipping your mind lately, Thomas. Now he looked up, wariness flickering across his features. What's that supposed to mean? You've been distracted, distant, always on your phone, working late more often than not. I barely see you anymore. A beat of silence as he formulated his response. I could almost see him sorting through possible explanations, selecting the one that would raise the fewest questions. I know I've been preoccupied with this project, he said finally, his expression softening into practiced concern. I'm sorry, Lena. It's been intense, but it'll calm down soon. The nickname, Lena, that once made me feel special, now felt like another manipulation. A calculated reminder of our intimacy, deployed precisely when I was questioning it. Is it just the project? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Or is there something else you want to tell me? His eyebrows drew together in a perfect simulation of confusion. What else would there be? I studied him, this man I had loved, trusted, built a life with, and saw a stranger. Or perhaps I was finally seeing the real Thomas, the one who had been hidden beneath the architect-husband persona all along. I don't know, I said after a long pause. But it feels like you're pulling away. Like there's something you're not telling me. Thomas set down his knife and turned to face me fully, placing his hands on my shoulders. The gesture that once would have comforted me now made my skin crawl. Elena, he said, his voice soft with manufactured sincerity. There's nothing going on. I'm just buried in work. This project is high profile, career-defining. Once it's over, things will go back to normal. I promise. Another lie. I knew from the text messages that he and Vanessa were already planning their future together. That normal would never return. The wellness consultant, Vanessa, I said, watching his face carefully. You've been spending a lot of time with her. A flash of something, alarm, guilt, crossed his features before he controlled it. She's a key partner on the project. Of course we've had meetings. Just meetings? His hands dropped from my shoulders. What are you implying? I think you know exactly what I'm implying. Thomas stepped back, his expression hardening. I can't believe you're doing this. Questioning my fidelity because I'm working long hours? Because I have meetings with a project consultant? Do you know how irrational that sounds? And there it was. The pivot to make me the unreasonable one. The manipulation tactic straight out of the cheater's handbook. Gaslighting 101. Is it irrational? I asked quietly. Or am I finally seeing clearly? You're seeing problems that don't exist, he snapped. And frankly, it's insulting. I've never given you any reason to doubt me. The audacity of the statement almost made me laugh. Never given me reason to doubt? While he was actively planning to stand me up on our anniversary to be with another woman, I could have confronted him then. Thrown the evidence in his face, the photos, the text messages, the apartment viewings, watched his carefully constructed lies crumble. But something held me back. A need to understand the full extent of his deception, a desire to know just how far he would go to maintain the facade. You're right, I said, affecting a contrite tone. I'm sorry. I've been stressed about my own projects, and I guess I projected that onto you. Relief washed over his face. He believed I had backed down, that his misdirection had worked. It's okay, he said, pulling me into an embrace that felt hollow. We're both under pressure. Let's just get through these next few weeks, and then we can focus on us again. I nodded against his chest, wondering if he could feel how stiff I was in his arms, how every muscle in my body resisted this false intimacy. That night, I lay beside him in bed, staring at the ceiling we had designed together, skylights positioned to show the stars, the moon's path across the night sky. I thought about all the conversations we'd had in this room, the dreams we'd shared, the plans we'd made. Had any of it been real? Or had I been living in a beautifully designed illusion all along? The next day, I met with my lawyer, Patricia Chen. We had worked together on contract negotiations for some of my historical renovation projects, and I trusted her implicitly. I brought the USB drive from Diane, explained the situation, and asked for her advice. You have grounds for divorce, obviously, Patricia said after reviewing the evidence. Infidelity is well documented here. Given Massachusetts' equitable distribution laws, you're entitled to half of all marital assets. The house might be complicated if you designed it together for your firm, but we can work through that. I don't care about the house, I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. The dream home that had once been my pride now felt tainted, corrupted by Thomas's betrayal. I just want out, cleanly, quickly. Patricia nodded, making notes. We can draw up the paperwork immediately, but I have to ask, have you confronted Thomas about this? Not directly. Not with the evidence. Do you plan to? I hesitated. I'm not sure yet. Well, there are strategic advantages to him not knowing you're aware of the affair until the papers are filed, Patricia advised. Less time for him to hide assets or prepare counter-arguments. I nodded, considering this. Our anniversary is next Friday. He's already made dinner reservations at Giovanni's. The restaurant where he proposed, Patricia noted, reading from Diane's report. Yes, but according to his texts with Vanessa, he plans to cancel at the last minute, claim he has to work late and go to her place instead. Patricia looked up from her notes, something like admiration in her eyes. You know where this is going. You have a plan. It wasn't a question. She could see it in my face, in my calm demeanor despite the circumstances. I'm developing one, I admitted. But I need your help with the paperwork. Tell me what you need. By the time I left Patricia's office, I had a clear path forward. The divorce papers would be drawn up immediately, ready for my signature, and eventually Thomas's. I also had names of realtors specializing in quick sales, movers who could work on short notice, and a banker who could help me establish separate accounts. That evening, Thomas texted that he would be working late again. I replied with understanding and support, playing the role of the oblivious, trusting wife one last time. Then I opened my laptop and began researching apartments in the city, not for Thomas and Vanessa, but for me. A fresh start in a space I would design for myself alone. The confrontation with Thomas hadn't given me the answers or closure I'd hoped for, but it had shown me something valuable. He would lie to my face without hesitation or remorse. He would manipulate, deny, and gaslight rather than admit the truth. And that knowledge steeled my resolve for what was to come. The woman who had once designed her life around a partnership was now drawing up blueprints for independence. And for the first time in months, despite everything, I felt a flicker of excitement about the future. With just 10 days until our anniversary, I shifted into methodical mode. The same mindset I used when approaching a complex architectural project. I needed to understand every dimension of Thomas's deception before I could dismantle it. I started by reviewing all the evidence Diane had collected. The photos told a clear story. Thomas and Vanessa meeting at restaurants, entering her apartment building, shopping for furniture, viewing the downtown condo. The timestamps created a damning timeline. All these rendezvous occurring during his late nights at the office or weekend work emergencies. The text messages were even more revealing. Beyond the romantic exchanges were practical discussions about their future. Thomas: "What do you think about the condo on Riverfront? The terrace would be perfect for your morning yoga videos." Vanessa: "Loved it. We could convert the second bedroom into a home studio for your drafting work. Best of both worlds." Thomas: "Once everything's settled with E, we'll make an offer." E, that's what I had been reduced to, an initial. An obstacle to be removed before they could begin their life together. But the most painful discovery came when I dug deeper into their history. In one text exchange, Vanessa had written, "Still can't believe we reconnected after all these years. Maybe everything happens for a reason." Thomas had replied, "Maybe that alumni event last spring was fate. Seeing you walk in was like being hit by lightning. Second chances don't come around often." I stared at those messages for a long time, the timeline rearranging itself in my mind. Last spring, the Westlake Prep alumni fundraiser. Thomas had attended in my place because I was at a conference in Chicago. He'd never mentioned running into Vanessa, which meant their affair hadn't begun 6 months ago, as I'd assumed. It had been going on for over a year of lies, a year of coming home to me, sleeping beside me, making plans with me, all while building a parallel life with her. With this new understanding, I reviewed our bank statements and credit card bills. From the past year, there they were, the charges I'd never questioned. Dinners at restaurants we never visited together, hotel rooms on nights he was supposedly at conferences, a weekend spa retreat during a business trip to New York. I documented everything meticulously, creating files organized by date, adding my own notes to Diane's reports. Not because I needed more evidence for the divorce. What I already had was more than sufficient, but because I needed to see the full architecture of his betrayal. Needed to understand its scope and scale before I could truly leave it behind. Next, I turned my attention to Vanessa herself. Why her? What was it about my teenage tormentor that had drawn Thomas away? I allowed myself one deep dive into her social media presence, not to torture myself, but to understand the narrative they were constructing together. Her Instagram feed was a testament to carefully curated perfection. Sunrise yoga poses on pristine beaches, artfully arranged acai bowls, inspirational quotes about living authentically and embracing your true self. The irony might have made me laugh if it weren't so painful. In one post from 3 months ago, she stood on a clifftop, arms outstretched toward the sunset with the caption, finally embracing the future I deserve. Some people come into your life at exactly the right moment. Grateful doesn't begin to cover it. Blessed aren't new beginnings. The comments were filled with heart emojis and supportive messages. No one knew she was referring to a married man. No one knew her new beginning would come at the expense of my ending. I closed her profile, resolving never to look at it again. Vanessa Monroe wasn't worth another minute of my attention. She hadn't been in high school, and she wasn't now. With a clearer understanding of the affair's timeline and dynamics, I turned to the logistics of my exit. I needed to secure my financial independence, find a new place to live, and prepare to extract myself from our shared life with surgical precision. First, I opened a separate bank account and transferred half of our savings, a substantial amount, given our dual professional incomes and careful money management. Massachusetts being an equitable distribution state, I was legally entitled to this portion, as Patricia had confirmed. Next, I toured 3 apartments in the city, finally selecting a modern loft in a converted textile factory. With its exposed brick walls, enormous windows, and open floor plan, it was a blank canvas waiting for my design vision. I signed a lease beginning the day after our anniversary, paying the security deposit and first month's rent from my new account. I met with a moving company, scheduled them for the morning of our anniversary when Thomas would be at work, and began discreetly packing items that wouldn't be missed. Winter clothes, books from my personal collection, professional, materials I rarely used. Each night I'd remove a few photographs from their frames, a few pieces of jewelry from my case, a few treasured mementos from our travels. Not everything at once, but gradually enough that Thomas, increasingly distracted by his double life, never noticed the slow erasure of my presence. At work, I spoke with my partners about taking on more historical renovation projects, the kind that might require travel, that would keep me busy during the transition. They were supportive, unaware of the real reason behind my sudden interest in more independent work. "You've seemed different lately," my colleague Michael observed one afternoon. "More focused, determined." "I'm just recentering," I replied, surprised by how true it felt. Getting clear on what I want. 7 days before our anniversary, I picked up the divorce papers from Patricia's office. They were comprehensive, fair, and designed to facilitate a clean break. I would keep my retirement accounts and investments. Thomas would keep his. We would sell the house and split the proceeds. No alimony, no drawn-out negotiations, no attempt to punish him financially for his betrayal. "Are you sure about these terms?" Patricia asked. "You're entitled to more." "I don't want more," I told her. "I want freedom. I want this chapter closed." I signed the papers that afternoon, my signature steady and certain. Then I placed them in a manila envelope, which I stored in my portfolio case, the one place I knew Thomas would never look. 3 days before our anniversary, I received a text from Thomas. "Looking forward to celebrating 7 years with you at Giovanni's. On Friday, made the reservation for 7. Love you. The performance continued, right on schedule." I replied with appropriate enthusiasm, playing my part in this final act of our marriage. That night, as Thomas showered, I took one last look at the evidence Diane had collected. The photos of Thomas and Vanessa together, the text messages planning, their future. The images of them viewing what would become their home once I was out of the picture. I copied everything to a USB drive, printed key text exchanges and photos, and placed them all in the manila envelope with the divorce papers. It was ready. I was ready. The investigation phase was complete. Now it was time to deliver my findings. 2 days before our anniversary, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place, not through Diane's surveillance or my own investigation, but through pure coincidence. I was meeting with a potential client in the cafe of the Museum of Fine Arts, discussing the renovation of her Victorian brownstone, when I overheard a familiar laugh. Vanessa was seated at a table across the room. deep in conversation with an elegant older woman I didn't recognize. I kept my focus on my client, but couldn't help glancing over occasionally. There was something about the older woman's profile that seemed strangely familiar. The distinctive slope of her nose, the way she gestured with her hands while speaking. When my meeting concluded, I took a circuitous route to the exit that brought me closer to their table. As I passed, I heard the older woman say, "I still can't believe you're dating Thomas Reynolds. I always hoped you two would reconnect after college." I froze mid-step, then forced myself to keep walking, my mind racing. After college? Thomas. And Vanessa had known each other in college? That wasn't possible. Thomas went to MIT. I'd met him there in the architecture program. Vanessa had gone to... Where had she gone? I searched my memory and came up blank. High school had been so traumatic that I'd deliberately avoided learning anything about her life afterward. Once safely outside the museum, I called Mia. "Do you remember where Vanessa Monroe went to college?" I asked without preamble. "Hello to you too," Mia replied. "And yes, unfortunately, she went to MIT. Her father was some big donor, so she got in despite being academically mediocre. Why are you asking about her?" MIT. The same university where I'd met Thomas, where we'd fallen in love over drafting tables and model buildings. Or so I'd thought. "Did Thomas know her there?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Thomas? I don't think so. They were in completely different programs. She was in business or communications or something. Why would they have crossed paths?" "Just wondering," I said vaguely. "Listen, I have to go. I'll call you later." I ended the call and stood still on the museum steps, piecing together this new information. Thomas and Vanessa had attended the same university at the same time. They might have known each other before I came into the picture. Before the alumni event where Thomas claimed they'd reconnected. When I got home, I went straight to our storage closet and pulled out Thomas's college yearbooks. Relics he kept out of nostalgia, but rarely looked at. I flipped through them with shaking hands until I found what I was looking for. A photo of the Student Architecture Association. There was Thomas, younger but recognizable, standing in the back row. And there, in the front row, smiling brightly, was Vanessa. The caption read, "Architecture Association welcomes business school students to annual networking mixer." So they had known each other. Had possibly been more than acquaintances. And neither of them had ever mentioned it. Not when Thomas learned Vanessa and I went to high school together. Not when he started working with her on the Wellness Center project. I photographed the yearbook page, then continued my search. In the senior yearbook, I found more evidence. Thomas and Vanessa at the same graduation party, standing close together in the background of a group shot. Her hand on his arm, familiar, intimate. I sat back on my heels, the yearbook open in my lap as a new possibility took shape in my mind. What if Thomas had known exactly who Vanessa was when he started working with her? What if he had known about our history, how she had bullied me, humiliated me, and pursued her anyway? Or worse, what if they had been involved in college before Thomas and I met? What if she was the one who got away, and I had been the consolation prize? I returned to Diane's files with new purpose, searching for any mention of their college, connection in the text messages she had intercepted. I found it in a thread from 2 months earlier. Vanessa, remember that night in the architecture studio? When we nearly got caught by the security guard? Thomas, how could I forget? I still have that pencil sketch you did of me sleeping on the drafting table. Vanessa, you do not. That was 15 years ago. Thomas, of course I kept it. I kept everything from those days. Just couldn't bring myself to throw away any reminder of you, even after, well, you know, Vanessa. After I chose Bradley and broke your heart? God, what a mistake that was. But we found our way back to each other. That's all that matters now. I stared at the exchange, my hands cold. Thomas and Vanessa hadn't just known each other in college. They had been involved, seriously involved. From the sound of it, she had chosen someone else, and Thomas had ended up with me. Was that why he had never mentioned knowing her when the wellness center project began? Because he didn't want me to know I had been his second choice all along? I scrolled through more messages, finding scattered references to their shared past. Thomas. Elena never understood why I insisted on keeping that old drafting table. Couldn't exactly tell her it was where I fell in love for the first time. Vanessa. It's weird that she never knew about us. You never told her, Thomas? Why would I? It was over long before I met her. And once I realized who she was, your high school nemesis, there was definitely no reason to bring it up. Vanessa. God, that's right. I was awful to her in high school. Karma's a bitch, I guess. I was horrible to her. And then you married her. Instead of me. Thomas. Let's not think about the past anymore. We're correcting that mistake now. I felt physically ill. Thomas had known. Had known from the beginning who Vanessa was, what she had done to me. Had married me while carrying a torch for her. And now they were framing their affair as some kind of cosmic correction, as if our marriage had been the detour from their proper path. With trembling fingers, I searched for more and found a conversation from just last week. Vanessa. So have you decided how you're going to do it? After the anniversary dinner cancellation, I mean. Thomas. I'll wait a few weeks, then tell her I'm unhappy, that we've grown apart. I'll suggest a trial separation, move in with you, then file for divorce once some time has passed. Vanessa. That's so civilized. She deserves worse. Trust me. In high school, she was such a pathetic, desperate tryhard, always raising her hand in class, always trying to be perfect. It was nauseating. Thomas. Well, she hasn't changed much. Still obsessed with perfection. Still desperate for validation. It's exhausting, to be honest. Vanessa. You poor baby. Don't worry, I'll make it all better once you're free of her. Speaking of which, have you talked to your lawyer about the house? Thomas. He thinks I can keep it. I did most of the actual architectural work, even though she loves to take credit. With the right arguments, I can make the case it's primarily my creation, not marital property to be divided. I read that exchange 3 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. So this was their plan. Thomas would pretend to be unhappy, suggest a separation, then take our home, the home I had poured my heart into designing with him. Meanwhile, he was already disparaging me to his lover, painting me as pathetic and desperate, the same cruel characterization Vanessa had used to torment me in high school. And Vanessa, she hadn't changed at all. Still cruel, still dismissive, still taking pleasure in my pain, even if I wasn't meant to know about it this time. I closed the files and sat in absolute stillness, letting the full truth wash over me. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a calculated dismantling of my life by 2 people who had known each other long before I entered the picture. 2 people who viewed my pain as collateral damage in their journey back to each other. Thomas hadn't just lied about working late. He had lied about our entire relationship, about who he was, about what our marriage meant to him, about everything. I thought I had understood the scope of his betrayal. I was wrong. It went deeper, stretched further back in time, was more fundamentally entwined with my history than I could have imagined. Strangely, this final revelation didn't bring more pain. Instead, it brought clarity, crystal clear certainty that I was making the right decision, that walking away wasn't just necessary, it was the only possible response to such profound deception. I carefully returned the yearbooks to their shelf, wiped away any traces of my presence in the storage closet, and went to my studio to finalize the last details of my plan. One day, until our anniversary. One day, until Thomas would pretend to celebrate 7 years of marriage, only to abandon me for the woman who had tormented me in high school, dated him in college, and was now helping him plan to take everything from me. One day, until I turned their plan on its head. The morning of our anniversary dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows we had carefully positioned to catch the first rays of day. Thomas was already gone. An early meeting, he'd claimed, kissing me goodbye while I pretended to be half asleep. I lay in bed for a few minutes, experiencing the strange sensation of knowing this was the last morning I would wake up in this house. The last day I would be Thomas's wife. The last hours of a life I had spent years building. I had expected to feel grief, anxiety, perhaps even second thoughts. Instead, I felt remarkably calm. The path forward was clear now, illuminated by the full revelation of Thomas's betrayal. No more doubt. No more uncertainty. Only action. I got up and dressed carefully, choosing a tailored charcoal pantsuit that made me feel powerful, armored. Then I made a series of calls, confirming that everything was in place for what would come. Next, the movers arrived at 9, discreet and efficient as promised. I directed them to the items I had already packed and labeled: my personal belongings, family heirlooms, professional materials. Not everything I was entitled to, but everything that mattered to me. Everything I would need to start fresh. Just these? The head mover asked, clearly surprised by the relatively small amount. Nothing else from the house? Just these, I confirmed. The furniture, the appliances, the carefully curated decor. Thomas could have it all. Let him explain to Vanessa why their new love nest was filled with remnants of his marriage. By noon, the moving truck was loaded and on its way to my new apartment. I walked through the house one last time, saying goodbye not to the physical space, but to the dreams it had contained. The future I had imagined unfolding within these walls. The family we might have started. The growing old together we had planned. In my studio, I left my final architectural drawings for the house. Plans for an extension we had discussed, a garden redesign I had been working on, a ghost of the future that would never be. In Thomas's office, I paused, looking at the framed photo of us on our wedding day. Should I take it? Leave it? In the end, I placed it face down in his desk drawer. Let him find it someday and remember what he threw away. In our bedroom, I gathered my remaining toiletries, the last few pieces of jewelry, the book from my nightstand. I changed the sheets, not out of courtesy, but because I couldn't bear the thought of Thomas and Vanessa eventually sharing the bed where I had slept. By 2 o'clock, every trace of my personal presence had been erased from the house. What remained was a showpiece, beautiful but sterile, like a model home staged for viewing. I took one final photograph of each room with my phone, not for sentiment, but for documentation. Proof of the condition in which I had left everything, in case Thomas later claimed otherwise. At 3, I met with my banker to consolidate my new financial arrangements. Separate accounts established, automatic payments redirected, joint credit cards canceled. The practical architecture of independence, each element carefully constructed. Changing your name back as well? The banker asked as she processed the paperwork. I hesitated. I had been Elena Reynolds for 7 years. It was the name on my professional certifications, my design awards, my business cards. Yes, I decided. Back to Elena Castillo. By 4, I was at my new apartment, directing the movers as they brought in my belongings. The loft was exactly what I needed. Open, full of light, unencumbered by memories. The exposed brick walls and industrial windows couldn't have been more different from the warm modernism of the house Thomas and I had designed. That was deliberate. No echoes, no reminders. I unpacked only what I needed for the night: a change of clothes, basic toiletries, sheets for the new bed the movers had assembled. The rest could wait. Tonight had its own timeline, its own purpose. At 5, I showered and began getting ready. I dried my hair, applied makeup with careful precision, and chose a dress I had bought specifically for this occasion. Midnight blue, elegant, but not flashy. Professional enough to convey seriousness, but formal enough for what was supposedly an anniversary dinner. As I fastened the silver necklace my grandmother had given me on my wedding day, the only piece of jewelry I chose to wear, my phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Running a little behind. See you at Giovanni's at 7:15 instead of 7. Can't wait to celebrate with you. Love you. The carefully constructed lie. The first step in his plan to cancel on me, to go to Vanessa instead. I texted back, no problem, see you at 7:15. Love you too. Lies answering lies. The last exchange of our marriage. At 5:45, I was ready. I stood in front of the mirror in my new apartment, studying my reflection. The woman who looked back at me was composed, determined, clear-eyed. So different from the confused, hurt woman I had been when I first suspected Thomas's infidelity. I picked up the manila envelope containing the divorce papers and the evidence of his betrayal, securely sealed and ready to be delivered. Then I gathered my keys, phone, and purse, and headed for the door. But at the last moment, I paused. Was this really what I wanted to do? Was this elaborate confrontation necessary? Or was it just revenge dressed up as closure? I sat on the edge of my new bed, envelope in hand, and considered my options. I could simply file the divorce papers through normal channels. Let Thomas be served at his office or at home. Never see him or Vanessa again. Make a clean break without the drama of confrontation. I could go to Giovanni's as planned, wait for his inevitable cancellation text, then send him the evidence electronically. Let him face his betrayal alone, without the audience of Vanessa or myself. I could even do nothing tonight. Let him think he had gotten away with it, that his plan was working, and blindside him with divorce papers next week, after he thought his deception had succeeded. Each option had its merits. Each would achieve the fundamental goal, ending my marriage to a man who had betrayed me in the most profound way possible. But as I sat there, turning the envelope over in my hands, I knew what I needed to do, not for revenge, not even for closure, but for myself, for the girl who had been tormented by Vanessa in high school, for the woman who had loved Thomas with her whole heart, for the architect who had built her life on a foundation of lies, not of her making. I needed to look them both in the eye, one last time. Needed them to see me, truly see me, as I walked away from their deception on my own terms. Decision made, I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and walked out the door. The path forward was clear now. No more reacting, no more investigating, no more doubt, only action. The drive to Vanessa's apartment was surreal. I knew the route by heart, having studied the surveillance photos from Diane's investigation so thoroughly. 3rd floor, apartment 3B, in one of those luxury mid-rises downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and concierge service. The kind of place Thomas and I had always dismissed as style over substance in our architectural critiques. I parked a block away, positioned with a clear view of both the building entrance and Vanessa's balcony. Then I waited, the manila envelope on the passenger seat beside me, the clock on my dashboard reading 6:22 p.m. While I waited, I mentally reviewed the plan one last time, checking for weaknesses or oversights the way I would examine structural drawings before construction. The timing was critical. Thomas had texted that he would meet me at Giovanni's at 7:15. Accounting for the 20-minute drive from our house to the restaurant, he would need to leave by 6:55 at the latest. But according to the text messages Diane had intercepted, he had no intention of going to Giovanni's. Instead, he planned to text me at around 7 house with his work emergency excuse, then spend the evening with Vanessa. So the real timeline would be Thomas arriving at Vanessa's apartment sometime before 7 high. their anniversary celebration beginning. His cancellation text to me soon after. And then, at precisely 7:30, my arrival at their doorstep. I had deliberately chosen 7:30, late enough that they would be settled in, comfortable, perhaps already celebrating what they thought was the successful execution of their plan, early enough that the evening would still be young, the betrayal fresh, the surprise complete. At 6:48, right on schedule, Thomas's car pulled into the parking garage beneath Vanessa's building. I watched him emerge from the elevator in the lobby. A few minutes later, checking his appearance in the reflective glass of the front doors before proceeding to the inner elevator, he carried a bottle of champagne and what appeared to be a gift bag, presumably containing the diamond tennis bracelet he had purchased for her. My husband, on our 7th anniversary, bringing champagne and diamonds to another woman's apartment. If I hadn't already been numb to the pain of his betrayal, the sight might have broken me. Instead, I watched with clinical detachment, mentally noting the time. 6:53 p.m. He was right on schedule, too. At 7:01, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. I didn't need to look to know what it said, but I checked anyway. Elena, I'm so sorry. Client emergency just came up. Major issue with the sustainability certification. Have to head back to the office right now. Don't know how long it will take. Probably need to cancel dinner. I'll make it up to you this weekend, I promise. So sorry. Love you. The carefully crafted lie, designed to sound urgent yet plausible. The false apology. The empty promise to make it up later. The obligatory love. You, tacked on at the end like an afterthought. I didn't reply. Let him wonder if I was angry, disappointed, suspicious. Let him check his phone repeatedly during his evening with Vanessa, a small cloud of uncertainty hanging over their celebration. At 7:10, I called Giovanni's and canceled our reservation. No need to tie up a table on a busy Friday night. Besides, I had no intention of going there alone to nurse my supposed heartbreak over wine and sympathy from the staff who had witnessed Thomas's proposal 7 years earlier. Is everything all right, Mrs. Reynolds? The maitre d' asked, concern evident in his voice. Mr. Reynolds called earlier to confirm. Everything is exactly as it should be, I replied, surprising myself with how true the words felt. Plans have simply evolved. At 7:20, I drove the short distance to Vanessa's building and parked directly in front. I checked my appearance in the rearview mirror, makeup still perfect, expression composed, eyes clear. I looked like a woman in control of her destiny, not a betrayed wife on the verge of confrontation. I gathered the manila envelope and my purse, then sat for a moment, taking slow, deliberate breaths. This was the moment everything had been building toward, the pivot point between my old life and whatever came next. I thought about Thomas and Vanessa, probably toasting their future together at this very moment, celebrating not just their reunion, but the imminent dissolution of my marriage, planning the life they would build in the apartment they had toured together, perhaps even in the house Thomas intended to take from me through legal maneuvering. Did they feel any remorse? Any guilt? Or did they justify their actions through the narrative they had constructed, that they were destined to be together, that their college romance had been the real thing, that the past 15 years had merely been an unfortunate detour on their way back to each other? It didn't matter. Their narrative, their justifications, their feelings, none of it mattered anymore. This confrontation wasn't for them. It was for me, my closure, my reclamation of power, my final act in a marriage built on deception. At 7:29, I stepped out of my car and walked into Vanessa's building with the confidence of someone who belonged there. The concierge looked up as I approached. I'm here to see Vanessa Monroe in 3B, I said, my voice steady. She's expecting me. A half-truth. She was expecting someone tonight, just not me. The concierge nodded and gestured toward the elevator. Go right up. She's in. I thanked him and stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the 3rd floor. As the doors closed and the elevator began its ascent, I felt a strange sense of calm descend over me. The pieces were all in place. The plan was in motion. In moments, I would be face to face with my husband and his mistress on what was supposed to be our anniversary. Some might call what I was about to do cruel or vindictive. But standing in that elevator, manila envelope in hand, I knew it was neither. It was necessary. A controlled demolition of a structure that had already been compromised beyond repair. The only way to clear the ground for whatever I would build next. The elevator doors opened on the third floor. I stepped out, turned right as I had seen Thomas do in the surveillance photos, and walked down the hallway to apartment 3B. From behind the door came the faint sound of music, the clink of glasses, laughter. I checked my watch, 7:30 exactly. With one last deep breath, I raised my hand and pressed the doorbell. The moment had arrived. The sound of the doorbell echoed through the apartment, followed by a sudden silence. The music stopped. The laughter cut off. For a long moment, nothing happened. I could picture the scene on the other side of the door, Thomas and Vanessa frozen in place, exchanging panicked glances. Who could be visiting at this hour? Had someone seen Thomas enter the building? Was it a neighbor? A friend? The worst-case scenario they hadn't planned for? I pressed the doorbell again, more insistently this time. Muffled voices came from inside, too, quiet to make out the words, but their urgent tone was unmistakable. Then footsteps approaching the door. A shadow passed across the peephole. The door swung open, and there stood Thomas, his expression shifting rapidly from annoyed to shocked to horrified as he registered my presence. "Elena?" My name emerged as a strangled whisper. "What are you... How... did you... Happy anniversary, Thomas," I said calmly, holding up the manila envelope. "May I come in?" His face had drained of color. He stood frozen in the doorway, blocking my entrance, unable to process what was happening. From somewhere behind him, Vanessa's voice called out, "Thomas, who is it?" She appeared behind him a moment later, wearing a red silk dress that was far more appropriate for an anniversary celebration than a casual evening in. Her expression matched Thomas's shock, but recovered more quickly, morphing into something defensive and calculating. "Elena," she said, her voice falsely bright. "What? A surprise? Is it?" I asked, still standing in the hallway, still holding the envelope. "I'd think you of all people would expect the unexpected from me, Vanessa. You never did appreciate how resilient I could be. Not in high school, and apparently not now." Thomas found his voice at last. "Elena, I can explain—" "I'm sure you can," I interrupted. "You've been explaining things to me for months. Late nights at the office, work emergencies, client meetings." I checked my watch pointedly. "Speaking of which, shouldn't you be handling that major issue with the sustainability certification right now? The one that forced you to cancel our anniversary dinner?" He flinched as his own lie was thrown back at him. Behind him, Vanessa's expression hardened. "Are you going to invite me in?" I asked. "Or would you prefer to have this conversation in the hallway where all your neighbors can enjoy it?" Thomas stepped back automatically, his training in social niceties overriding his panic. I walked past him into Vanessa's apartment, taking in the scene with one sweeping glance. The evidence of their planned celebration was everywhere. An ice bucket with champagne, the bottle Thomas had brought earlier, now open. 2 glasses, partially filled. A small jewelry box open on the coffee table, the diamond tennis bracelet glittering inside. Music paused mid-song on the stereo. Candles lit around the room, and on the dining table, a cake. Not just any cake, a replica of our wedding cake, down to the architectural details Thomas and I had designed together for our special day, the ultimate desecration of our memories. "You went all out," I observed, gesturing to the elaborate setup. "Our wedding cake. Nice touch." Thomas stepped forward, hands outstretched in a placating gesture. Elena, please. This isn't what it looks like. The absurdity of the statement, standing in a candlelit apartment with another woman on our anniversary, champagne poured, gifts exchanged, might have made me laugh if the situation weren't so painful. No? I asked. It looks like you're celebrating your anniversary with Vanessa instead of your wife. It looks like you bought her a diamond bracelet with our joint funds. It looks like you recreated our wedding cake to mark the occasion. I paused, letting each observation land like a blow. It looks like betrayal, Thomas. Complete and deliberate betrayal. You don't understand, he began, but I cut him off. I understand perfectly. I understand that you've been lying to me for over a year. I understand that you and Vanessa knew each other in college, dated seriously, and reconnected at the alumni event last spring. I understand that you've been planning a future together, looking at apartments, discussing how you'll take our house in the divorce. With each revelation, Thomas's face grew paler. Vanessa, meanwhile, had moved to stand beside him, her shock giving way to calculation as she assessed the situation. How did you... Thomas started, then stopped, realizing the question itself was an admission. Does it matter? I asked. The point is, I know everything. The late nights, the hotel rooms, the weekend trips disguised as business travel, the texts, the plans, all of it. I turned to Vanessa, meeting her gaze directly. And I know about your history too. How you tormented me in high school, dated Thomas in college, then reconnected with him while he was still married to me. How you've been helping him plan to leave me, not just for love, but for my house, my assets, everything we built together. Vanessa's expression flickered between defiance and unease. You always were dramatic, Elena, she said finally. This is between you and Thomas. You're just the woman who's sleeping with my husband, I finished for her. Again, because apparently once wasn't enough for either of you. Thomas took a step toward me, his shock beginning to give way to anger. You had us investigated? Had us followed? What kind of person does that? The kind whose husband is cheating on her, I replied evenly. The kind who deserves the truth after 7 years of marriage. The kind who won't be gaslit or manipulated into believing she's crazy for noticing the obvious. I moved to the dining table and set down the manila envelope beside the wedding cake replica. The juxtaposition was perfect. The symbol of our beginning next to the instrument of our end. I brought you an anniversary gift as well, I said, tapping the envelope. Something to mark the occasion properly. Thomas stared at the envelope, dread evident in his expression. Vanessa moved closer to him, her hand finding his arm in a possessive gesture that spoke volumes. What is this, Elena? Thomas asked, his voice strained. What are you doing? I looked around the apartment once more, taking in the scene of their celebration, the evidence of their duplicity, the future they had planned at my expense. Then I turned back to Thomas, meeting his eyes directly for what I knew would be the last time. I'm ending our story, I said simply. On my terms, not yours. And with that, I reached for the envelope. I opened the manila envelope with deliberate slowness, aware of both Thomas and Vanessa watching me with a mixture of dread and disbelief. The moment felt suspended, crystallized in time, the calm before the demolition. You know, I said conversationally as I extracted the contents, I've been thinking about what makes a good design. In architecture, it's not just about aesthetics, it's about integrity, about every element being true to its purpose, about honesty in materials and construction. I looked directly at Thomas. Our marriage lacked structural integrity from the beginning, didn't it? Built on a foundation that was already compromised. Thomas swallowed visibly. Elena, please. I held up a hand, silencing him. I'm not finished. I laid out the first set of photographs on the table beside the cake. Thomas and Vanessa entering. Her apartment building. Thomas and Vanessa at dinner, his hand on hers. Thomas and Vanessa viewing the downtown condo, planning their future. Quite the portfolio you've been developing, I said, my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. Very comprehensive. Thomas stared at the photos, his face ashen. You had us followed. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes. After months of lies, I needed the truth. And a good architect always verifies their measurements before proceeding. Vanessa stepped forward, her shock giving way to anger. This is harassment. You can't just spy on people. Interesting moral stand from someone sleeping with a married man, I replied, then turned back to Thomas. But the surveillance was just the beginning. Next, I laid out the printouts of their text messages, the plans for their future, the disparaging comments about me, the strategy for how Thomas would leave me while taking as much as possible. Your own words, I said quietly. Your true thoughts about me, about our marriage, about the house we designed together. Thomas reached for the papers with trembling hands. Where did you get these? Does it matter? They're authentic, aren't they? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I continued laying out evidence, methodical and calm. The yearbook photos showing their college connection. The credit card statements documenting their hotel stays. The receipt for the diamond bracelet now glittering on Vanessa's wrist. A complete record of betrayal, I said, stepping back to survey the display. Architectural documentation of a failed structure. Thomas had gone from pale to flushed, anger beginning to replace shock. So this is why you're here? To throw evidence? In our faces? To what end, Elena? Revenge? Humiliation? What do you want? Clarity, I replied simply. And closure. But most importantly, control over my own story. I removed the final item from the envelope, the divorce papers, already signed by me, with Thomas's signature line highlighted in yellow. I'm not here to fight for a marriage that never truly existed, I said, placing the papers on top of the evidence pile. I'm here to end it cleanly, on my terms, not yours. Thomas stared at the divorce papers, comprehension slowly dawning. You're filing for divorce. I already have, I corrected. These are just for your signature. Everything's fairly standard. Equal. Division of liquid assets, sale of the house with proceeds split equally, each of us keeping our own retirement accounts and personal property. The house, Thomas began, a hint of his earlier calculation returning. I did most of the architectural work. Save it for someone who doesn't know better, I interrupted. We designed that house together, and we both know it. But honestly, Thomas, you can have it. Surprise flickered across his face. What? You can have the house, I repeated. Live there with Vanessa. Fill it with the ghosts of our marriage. I've already moved out. You've moved out? The realization seemed to hit him like a physical blow. When? Today, while you were preparing. For your anniversary celebration with her, I was removing every trace of myself from our home. I gestured around Vanessa's apartment. Consider it my gift to you both, a clean slate. Vanessa, who had been watching this exchange with growing unease, finally spoke. You expect us to believe you're just walking away? No fight? No demands? No drama? I turned to her, seeing not the confident bully from high school or the triumphant mistress, but a woman who had built her happiness on someone else's pain. A woman who didn't understand that true strength comes from walking away, not from taking what isn't yours. I don't expect you to believe anything, Vanessa. Your opinion stopped mattering to me a long time ago. But yes, I'm walking away. Not because I'm weak or defeated, but because I deserve better than a husband who lies and a life built on deception. I picked up the divorce papers and held them out to Thomas. Sign them now, and it's done. Quick, clean, final. Or don't, and I'll file a contested divorce with all of this as evidence. I gestured to the photographs and text messages spread across the table. Your choice. Thomas stared at the papers, then at me, searching for the catch, the hidden agenda, the trap. Finding none, because there wasn't one. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about freedom. "A pen," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I need a pen." Vanessa made a small sound of protest, but I was already reaching into my purse. I had come prepared, down to the smallest detail. I handed Thomas a pen, the same one he had used to sign our mortgage papers, our joint bank accounts, the countless documents of our shared life. One last signature to end it all. Thomas stood at Vanessa's dining table, divorce papers in one hand, my pen in the other. The moment stretched between us. 7 years of marriage, a decade of history, reduced to the final stroke of a pen. "This is what you really want?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "This is what you really want," I corrected him. You made that clear in every text message, every lie, every night spent with her instead of me. "I'm just finalizing your choice." He looked down at the papers, then at Vanessa, who stood with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Whatever silent communication passed between them, it ended with Thomas leaning over the table, signing his name with quick, decisive strokes. The sound of pen against paper echoed in the silent apartment. With each signature, there were 6 places marked for him to sign. Something shifted in the atmosphere. The tension didn't dissolve exactly, but transformed. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was a conclusion. When he finished, Thomas straightened up and handed the papers back to me. Our fingers didn't touch. "It's done," he said, his voice flat. "Yes," I agreed, placing the signed documents carefully back in the manila envelope. "It is." Vanessa moved closer to Thomas, her hand finding his arm in that possessive gesture again. "So that's it? You got what you came for. I assume you'll be leaving now." I smiled at her, not with malice but with genuine relief. "I am. But first, there's something I want to say to both of you." Thomas tensed visibly. "Elena, I don't hate you," I said simply. "Either of you. I thought I would. I thought I'd want revenge, want to see you suffer. But standing here now, I just feel free." I looked around the apartment, at the evidence laid out on the table, the candles still flickering, the champagne going flat in its glasses. You two have built something together on a foundation of lies and betrayal. That's your choice, and you'll have to live with it. But I refuse to be defined by your choices anymore. Not by Vanessa's cruelty in high school, not by Thomas's deception in our marriage. I turned to Thomas. "You told Vanessa I was pathetic, desperate for validation, obsessed with perfection. Maybe I was. With you, with us, with the life we were building. But not anymore." Then to Vanessa. "And you. You once told everyone I was nothing, that I'd never amount to anything. You were wrong then, and you're wrong now. I've built a life I'm proud of, a career that matters, and I did it without tearing anyone else down." I gathered my purse, checking, to make sure the envelope with the signed divorce papers was secure inside. These documents were my freedom. I wouldn't risk losing them. "I hope you'll be happy together," I said, and meant it. I really do, because I intend to be happy without you. Thomas's face was a study in conflicting emotions, relief that I wasn't causing a scene, confusion at my calm demeanor, perhaps even a flicker of regret. "The house," he began. "You said I could have it, but legally—" "My lawyer will contact yours on Monday," I interrupted. "Everything will be handled properly. The house, the assets, all of it." I meant what I said. I don't want to fight. I just want to move forward. I walked to the door, conscious of both of them watching me. At the threshold, I paused and turned back one last time. You know what the strangest part is? I should thank you both. Thomas, your betrayal forced me to see what I've been accepting, what I've been settling for. And Vanessa, You taught me twice in one lifetime how to rise above someone else's cruelty and find my own strength. I smiled, and it felt genuine. Perhaps the first real smile I'd offered either of them in months. Goodbye, Thomas. Goodbye, Vanessa. Enjoy the cake. And with that final word, I walked out the door, closing it firmly. Behind me, in the quiet hallway, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past year. The suspicions, the investigations, the revelations, the planning, finally lift from my shoulders. I had entered that apartment as Elena Reynolds, betrayed wife. Walked out as Elena Castillo, architect of her own future. The elevator doors closed on Vanessa's hallway, sealing away the apartment where my marriage had just officially ended. As the elevator descended, I expected some dramatic emotional response. Tears, perhaps, or hysterical laughter, or even a wave of regret. Instead, I felt oddly calm, centered, present in a way I hadn't been for months. The elevator reached the lobby, and I walked out with measured steps, nodding politely to the concierge as I passed. Outside, the evening air was cool against my skin, the city lights blurring slightly as my eyes adjusted. I reached my car and sat behind the wheel, the signed divorce papers secure in my purse beside me. Done. Really, truly done. Only then did the magnitude of what had just happened begin to register, not as grief or anger, but as a profound sense of completion. I had confronted my husband and his mistress on my own terms. I had maintained my dignity. I had walked away without letting bitterness consume me. I started the car and pulled away from Vanessa's building, half expecting to see Thomas rush out, call after me, beg for another chance. But the entrance remained empty. Of course it did. He had made his choice long ago, just as I had made mine tonight. As I drove through the city streets, I realized I had no destination in mind. Not Giovanni's, where our reservation had been canceled. Not the house that was no longer my home. Not even my new apartment, which still felt more like a concept than a reality. I was between worlds, suspended in the liminal space that follows. The end of one chapter but precedes the beginning of the next. On impulse, I turned toward the waterfront. The night was clear, the moon reflected on the harbor's surface as I parked and made my way to a bench overlooking the water. I sat down, wrapping my arms around myself against the slight chill, and simply breathed. 7 years of marriage ended. In a handful of signatures. A decade of history, concluded in a 20-minute confrontation. The future I had planned, redirected in an instant. My phone buzzed in my purse, a text message. For a moment, I thought it might be Thomas, reality, having finally sunk in. But it was Mia. How did it go? Are you okay? Do you need me to come over? I had texted her earlier, letting her know my plans in the vaguest terms. Just in case something went wrong, I had wanted someone to know where I was. It's done, I replied. I'm okay. Actually, I'm better than okay. I'll call you tomorrow. Going, to take some time for myself tonight. I silenced my phone and returned it to my purse, then looked out over the water again. The city skyline reflected in the harbor. Buildings I had admired my entire career. Some I had even contributed to in small ways. Solid, impressive structures that nonetheless appeared to shimmer and shift in the water's reflection. Nothing was as permanent as it seemed. Not buildings, not marriages, not identities constructed around other people's expectations. A strange, unexpected sound escaped me. Laughter. Not bitter or hysterical, but genuine amusement at the absurdity of life's twists. I, Elena Castillo, had spent years trying to design the perfect marriage, the perfect home, the perfect life, only to discover that true perfection lay in the courage to walk away from what wasn't working. I remembered Thomas's cruel assessment of me in his texts to Vanessa, obsessed with perfection, desperate for validation. Perhaps there had been truth in that. Perhaps I had been so focused on creating the ideal facade that I had ignored the crumbling foundation beneath. No more. The facade was gone now, deliberately dismantled by my own hands. What remained was just me. Imperfect, resilient, newly free. I stayed by the water for nearly an hour, watching the moon's path across the sky, listening to the gentle lapping of waves against the harbor wall. The night air grew cooler, but I didn't move. This moment, this first moment of my new life, deserved to be fully experienced, fully felt. When I finally stood to leave, my legs were stiff from sitting. But my mind was clearer than it had been in months. I knew where I was going now, not just physically to my new apartment, but forward, wherever that might lead. I walked back to my car with steady steps, the signed divorce papers in my purse, and the future unwritten before me. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't following someone else's blueprint. I was creating my own, and for now, that was enough. 3 weeks after delivering the divorce papers, I stood in my new loft, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and furniture arranged in tentative configurations. Morning light streamed through the industrial windows, casting geometric patterns across the wooden floors. I held a mug of coffee, surveying what would become my new drafting area. The divorce had been finalized with surprising speed. Thomas hadn't contested anything after our confrontation. According to my lawyer, he had accepted all terms exactly as written. The house was on the market, our joint accounts divided, our shared life efficiently dismantled. What surprised me most wasn't the logistical ease of the separation, but how my perspective on the entire marriage had shifted. I had spent years believing Thomas and I were perfect together. Complementary minds, shared passions, mutual understanding. But with distance came clarity. The perfect partnership I had cherished was largely my own creation, a carefully maintained illusion I had defended against mounting evidence to the contrary. The signs had always been there. Thomas's casual dismissal of my ideas, the subtle ways he took credit for our joint projects, his disinterest in the parts of my life that didn't directly involve him. I had interpreted his behavior as distraction, stress, the normal ebbs and flows of a long-term relationship. Now I recognized it for what it was, a fundamental lack of respect. It hadn't started with Vanessa. She was merely the catalyst that exposed what had been present all along. This realization didn't bring bitterness, but a strange sort of peace. I wasn't mourning the loss of a perfect marriage. I was acknowledging that such perfection had never existed. And in that acknowledgement lay freedom. I set down my coffee and unrolled a large sheet of paper on the makeshift desk by the windows. I had sketched preliminary plans for the loft's renovation, not a dramatic overhaul, but thoughtful adjustments to make the space truly mine. Unlike the house I had designed with Thomas, this would be a space that reflected me alone, my aesthetics, my needs, my vision. No compromises, no deference to someone else's preferences. As I sketched, I realized I was designing more than just a living space. I was drafting the blueprints for a new life, one built on a foundation of self-knowledge and genuine integrity. For the first time, I was the sole architect of my future. And the possibilities were endless. 6 months after that rainy night when I delivered divorce papers to my husband and his mistress, I'm sitting in my renovated loft, speaking directly to you. Yes, you, the person who might be sitting alone right now, wondering if the pain will ever end, if the betrayal will ever stop burning, if you'll ever feel whole again. I'm here to tell you, it does. It will. You can. The journey from that night to this moment wasn't easy. There were days when grief ambushed me in unexpected moments, while choosing paint colors for my new bedroom, when a song from our wedding played in a coffee shop, when I found Thomas's old sweatshirt in a box I hadn't fully unpacked. But here's what I discovered. Grief isn't the enemy. It's part of the process. It's how we honor what was real in relationships, even ones that end painfully. The trick is not to let grief become your permanent address. You might be wondering if I regret confronting Thomas and Vanessa that night. If I wish I had simply filed the papers through lawyers and walked away quietly. I don't. That moment of standing in my truth, of refusing to be a passive participant in my own life story, was transformative. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my power. But the real transformation happened afterward, in the quiet moments when I had to decide who Elena Castillo would be, without the identity of Thomas's wife to define me. I chose to be someone who doesn't let betrayal harden her heart, who doesn't allow past pain to dictate future choices, who recognizes that her worth was never dependent on someone else's ability to see it. 3 months ago, I launched my own architecture firm, specializing in innovative living spaces for women starting over, divorcees, widows, empty nesters, career changers. Women navigating major life transitions who need homes that support their transformation, not just shelter their belongings. Last month, I reconnected with a former colleague for coffee. It turned into dinner, then another dinner. I don't know where it's heading, and for the first time in my adult life, I'm okay with that uncertainty. I'm not rushing to design the entire structure before the foundation has even set. So if you're watching this because your own marriage is crumbling, because you've discovered betrayal, because you're standing at the precipice of profound change, I want you to hear me. This ending is not your failure. It's a redirecting, a chance to build something authentic on a foundation of truth. The hardest lesson I learned wasn't about Thomas or Vanessa or even marriage. It was about myself, about how I had compromised my own standards, ignored my instincts, and constructed an elaborate facade rather than facing reality. Never again. You deserve someone who chooses you every day, not just when it's convenient. You deserve honesty, even when it's difficult. You deserve love that doesn't require you to make yourself smaller, to look the other way, to accept less than what you give. Most importantly, you deserve your own unwavering support. Be as kind to yourself as you would be to your dearest friend, facing the same situation. Forgive yourself for not seeing the signs earlier, for hoping things would change, for staying longer than you should have. The architect in me wants to leave you with this. When a structure is built on a compromised foundation, no amount of beautiful design can prevent its eventual collapse. But from the rubble, you can gather the materials to build something new, something stronger, truer, and uniquely yours. I did. And you can too. My name is Elena Castillo. I am an architect, of buildings, yes, but more importantly, of my own life. And today, standing in this space I created for myself, I am more whole than I ever was in a marriage built on lies. Whatever chapter you're in right now, know this. Your story isn't over. It's simply taking an unexpected turn toward the person you were always meant to become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.